Hello, a very warm welcome to what we're reading this November. My name is Laura,
And I'm Rebecca.
and this is our virtual book club where we talk about the books we've read, non-fiction books specifically, why we picked them, and how we're going to apply them to our work as educators and entrepreneurs.
This month we chose 3 titles. We've got Get Together, How to Build Community with Your People. This one is by Bailey Richardson, Kevin Huynh, and Kai Sotto. Second, we've got The Coming Wave by Mustafa Suleyman. And third, How to Tell a Story from the folks over at the Moth. So grab a cup of coffee or your lunch if you're on my side of the pond and join us as we talk about the books and what's going to stay on our shelves. Which would you like to talk about first, Laura?
Well, I think before we even dive into it, because there's one book that I really don't like, I should say as a disclaimer that all of the opinions today are our own and therefore education and entertainment purposes. So when you're making any purchasing decisions, obviously do your own research. And with that, let's start with a book that we both actually started reading. I think it was the first one we both picked, and that's The Get Together, How to Build a Community with Your People. This was your pick, Rebecca. Do you want to share why you chose this one?
Laura, this is one of those titles that has been hanging out on my shelf for a while, and I can't remember how it got there, but I'm really glad that we found it.
I have lots of books like that where I'm like, how did I purchase that? Yeah, I can relate. So I'm going to go straight for it. I love this book. Thank you so much for picking it. It was an absolute joy to read. It's short, it's packed full of human stories in terms of how they've experienced forming communities, what's worked, and distilling it into the key elements and stages that really lay the foundations for a community. And they use the metaphor of firing things up, which I think is a wonderful way of describing it, like starting with the kindling of a community and then stoking the fire, finding those leaders and going from strength to strength. So I thought there was just so much warmth and practical things I could take away to apply to TESOL Pop specifically and that community there.
I agree. I absolutely loved this one. It got off to a bit of a slow start for me, but once I hit my stride with reading it, I was really invested. I have a background in nonprofit leadership and also in doing advocacy work for adult education. And I think for anybody who is working in either of those environments, this is absolutely a must read title. One of the things that really stood out for me was that there's a lot of content that supports the idea that you don't build a community for people, you build it with them. And there are a lot of successful examples that supported that well, I thought.
Yeah, I actually listened to the audio version of this book, and it came with a PDF that featured some of those stories of community leaders and what success they had. So, for example, females in Nigeria, there was a basketball group for girls, and they had these wonderful photos of these leaders and the stories that shone through and how they'd let go. Really, they started with an idea. They were very clear on what their purpose was for the community, who their people were, and what they wanted to achieve, and identified leaders within that community and let go of their role. Because sometimes it can be a bit difficult to let go of something that's your idea, but to share it with those leaders, identifying that talent very early on, and then using that to propel the community forward. So that whole notion that you just mentioned there of letting the people build and propel the community and not just one solo person is really crucial. And that definitely came through in those examples.
I agree. I think that one of the members, one of the authors of this book, I believe, is a photographer. And I read the Kindle version of this book, and there were some fantastic photos, although I have to admit that I missed the PDF.
We have both had different experiences, right? So I didn't get to see maybe the photos you're referring to about had the PDF, or maybe there's a combination of the two. But either way, what a terrific book. Do you think there's any way in which you mentioned it being applied to nonprofits specifically? Are there things that we could take away for our work as entrepreneurs and for-profit business owners?
Absolutely. I think that one of the interesting things that's springing up sort of in our education and entrepreneurship ecosystem is paid online membership communities. And this
Hmm.
was really interesting to me because that is actually how we met, I believe.
Yes.
Um, but This really talks about what it takes to keep a community appealing and vital. And I think for anybody who was interested in being a founder of a community that was very sustainable, this would be an excellent read.
Yeah, there's lots of transferable elements of this book that could go to that paid membership. I hadn't actually thought about that. So I'm really glad we're meeting up to unpack that, because that's something that potentially I could explore later. And I'm sure like listeners watching this now or watching the replay could think about too. So a brilliant book. Anything else to add before we move on to the next one?
Really enjoyed it. I'm excited about this one. I will read it again.
Yeah, me too. There's lots of really valuable tips and ideas in there. Shall we move on to the second one, which is The Coming Wave?
Yes, this was my pick. What did you think, Laura?
Do you want to say why you picked it first?
Yes, I will say why I picked it first. I am an AI enthusiast. Happy birthday, ChatGPT. Yay, it's your 1-year birthday today. I do a lot of public speaking and research in how AI can be used by adult educators, and I even wrote a book on it recently. So I was really interested to see where somebody who was deeply in that space, what they thought was coming next. And that is why this landed on our shelves.
Yes, I'm going to try and not be too severe in my criticism of this book, but this was certainly a book I didn't enjoy reading for several reasons. While his argument is valid, it is, firstly, I should probably say he warns against the harm and risk that comes with technological developments. From AI tech such as ChatGPT and what they can build to also biotech as well. And that is obviously a really important point he makes. But the strength of the argument is quite weak, I feel. So there's an example early on when he acknowledges people that disagree or may have a more optimistic or neutral opinion of technology and AI specifically and what the future may hold. And they had a term for them. It was pessimistic delusion trap, that if we disagree with him and we don't think that there is such a he doesn't paint a very bright future, I must say, in this book. So for people like myself who may be a bit more centralist in our opinions, I'm in a pessimistic delusion trap, and I didn't really like being told that at the start. It really puts you off people. I feel like this is a really good book that demonstrates how to lose friends in 20 pages or less. So that's one of the issues I had with this book and how it's structured. What about you?
So I will say it is definitely not what I thought it was. I use a tool called Readwise that gave me a free sample section of this. And it was the tiny portion of the book that focuses on the positives of what AI can do for humanity. Turns out that was a minuscule portion of this reading. But also, I'll say I didn't hate it. I listened to the audiobook. I was on a business trip, and I thought that the author was a good narrator, which matters to me. It is overly long, and it is about potential futures. So it is very difficult to back up future predictions with evidence because none of this has happened yet, or most of the things he talks about in the book haven't happened yet. So it's sort of 11 hours of listening to somebody talk about what they think the future might look like.
Yeah.
But as as educators, AI is a big part of education and a huge topic, controversial from all kinds of angles. And we are responsible for preparing students for the future of work and the future in general. So I think to at least look at this and consider it was valuable to me.
Yeah, there's obviously really good examples of where AI has been very harmful, and that double-edged sword that he explores with AI being built for good, but then being hijacked by other people with an ulterior motive, how it can have devastating consequences. And he refers to examples such as the WannaCry cyber attack on the NHS from 2019. If you look in the back, there's really good research there, but I still feel like the argument could have been so much more enriched had he given space for people that disagree with him. And that's really what I look for in books like this is, okay, there are people that disagree with you. There are optimists out there. There are people who are more focused on sentience in AI and it shouldn't be a priority, but give them a bit of space, acknowledge them, and then use that to propel your argument forward. The examples you used of the devastating potential impact that AI could have was through the metaphor, if you could call it. It's not really a metaphor because it happened, but the Luddites and the impact of that movement in breaking up the machinery, the looms, the weaving looms back in the 1800s. And I thought that was a bit misplaced and quite outdated to pick that. And I think also having studied history, I didn't like that aspect so much. I found it a bit frustrating that he used that as the example of how AI today could have a negative impact on people's jobs, on acceptance, on implementation, as one of the many themes that he looks at. Yeah.
Yeah, there's also, and he does somewhat touch on this, there's a really established historical trend of new technologies sometimes eliminating jobs, but almost always creating more jobs than they eliminate. And that I think is really glossed over here. It's just like, well, that's not going to happen this time. So I agree with you that I think that this would have been enriched by having some other voices and from more sectors. Like the NHS attack you mentioned, I would have loved to have heard somebody in healthcare talk about that and what healthcare has done to try to prevent something like that in the future.
Yeah, I think it's just a closing thought with this book. The whole time I was reading it, I was thinking, why has he written this? What's the point of this book that would have otherwise been a very good series of journal articles or white papers for him to write? And I think the agenda behind it is to popularize conversations that show the other side of AI and the risk that it entails and how we should really think about those risk factors and factor that into any design or any decisions we make surrounding AI as educators, as leaders in a community or governments and stuff like that. And I thought it serves that purpose, definitely. I don't know how many people are going to agree with him though, because of how the argument's structured. It'll be interesting to read other reviews and see what other people have taken from this and whether they align with that and whether they're going to take on board what he says or whether he's created that sense of distance because of the way he's presented the argument he's got in this book.
Yeah, my grandmother used to tell me that you catch more flies with honey.
Yeah.
And that's clearly not the principle he was working on.
Absolutely not. All righty. So with that, shall we move on? More? Yeah, the How to Tell a Story by the Moth. This was my pick. Just because it was an impulsive purchase. And I love the Moth podcast. I've been listening for maybe actually 10 years or more. And I saw that this book was available and I purchased it, which completely derails the whole purpose of this book club, which is to get through the books that are sitting on my bookshelf and not add to them. So I realized what a hypocrite I am in purchasing this book.
You can never have too many books, Laura.
Oh gosh, I think I'm definitely trying on that. What did you think of this one? Because this one is adapted from a podcast.
Oh goodness. I think I feel about this one the way you felt about the previous title. I will say I think it's me, not the book. But before we selected this, I was completely oblivious to the entire Moth universe. I didn't know about the podcast. I didn't know about like the events. Nothing. I was just like, okay, how to tell a story. I need to improve on that. But this was not for me.
Do you want to say what was it about it? I mean, we've covered a few things in the rehearsal. Which one would you like to highlight? There's quite a few bits.
So I typically use storytelling in some really particular context. I do advocacy work for adult education. I do teacher training and also some like writing and public speaking, as well as being in the classroom. Occasionally, I use it for fundraising. But this entire, not small book is about storytelling in the Moth way, which is a very personal story, 5 minutes, and has to fit some pretty stringent guidelines. I found it really difficult because that's not the parameters I'm typically working in to transfer this to the reasons that I need to use storytelling.
Yeah, I have to agree with you. Even as a fan of the Moth, this is very specific to the Moth storytelling style. So while there's some really useful points to take out, such as how a story can be structured, how to avoid losing your audience by dwelling in a flashback or in a emotional piece for too long, it still leaves me with the question of, where am I going to use this in my work? Am I going to use this in my work? I don't know. I don't know if I am. I think it's more for open mic nights, maybe. But yeah, maybe I need to just kind of reflect on it a bit more.
The only thing I came up with that I thought may be relevant for us in our work with educators is that I can see using not this book, but the Moth stories themselves for teaching listening with English language learners or
Yeah.
for high school equivalency and language students to break down the components of a story. I think that could work, but for me as a professional, I can't figure out how I would use this.
Yeah, I think that idea of using it in the classroom is a really good idea. And I was just thinking, as you were saying that, that I have some clients that I work with who are starting podcasts or are podcasting now. Maybe there's storytelling structures within this that would be really useful for them. So they're telling people stories within their community. And this is a good fit for that. So yeah, maybe a bit limited in the scope in where we can apply it for ourselves personally.
And one little disclaimer on this, I listened to the audio on this and I am on the spectrum. If you have sensory processing differences, I want to give you a heads up because you can't tell this from the sample. But there are dozens of voices in this book and they're all speaking at very different speeds. So if you are sensitive to that, you might prefer this in print, just something to
Mm.
consider.
That's a really good point, because there are lots of different voices, and they even leave you on a cliffhanger wondering what did happen to that person and their story, because it is just a clip from their story told on the Moth stage.
Yes, no full stories. I got invested a couple of times, and then it was just like, nope, and over to Susie in Kentucky.
Exactly. Well, with that then, I think it's pretty obvious what our top pick is for this month. Do you want to reveal which is going to take pride of place on your shelf?
Ooh, I think for anybody who's been listening, they know it's Get Together. I think that was the winner for us both, right, Laura?
Absolutely. I loved that book, Get Together, How to Build a Community. There's so many things in there that I can apply to both my nonprofit work and the voluntary work I do, as well as thinking about that paid membership that you mentioned earlier and how it could fit into that. So lots of gems in this one. Absolutely loved it. And look, it's a lovely sunset color. What do nothing
It's
to,
very soothing.
it's
I
great.
like it. Yeah.
Yeah. So what are we reading next? Because we picked two books, didn't we, for December? With it being the festive season, we thought we'd go for two rather than three. Do you want to introduce what they are?
Sure. We were a bit aspirational with these picks. I think that we were trying to align with our own New Year's resolutions potentially, as well as other people's. So we've got Do Nothing, How to Break Away from Overworking, Overdoing, and Underliving. And I think that's by Celeste Headlee. And we've also got The Power of Moments by Chip and Dan Heath.
Splendid. And we're going to be meeting on Thursday, the 4th of January at 12 p.m. Chicago time, or 7 p.m. for those of you based in Zurich. So if you want to read along and come and join the conversation, we'd love to see you there. Thanks so much, Rebecca. It's been lovely reading and sharing and unpacking these books. It's really helped to kind of clarify ideas and how I can bridge it back to my work. So thanks so much for your time.
Thank you, Laura. I agree. It's really helpful to discuss them with some friends.
And thanks for everybody who's watching live now and also watching the replay. I appreciate you spending time with us. Until next time, happy reading. Bye.